All right, so we're going to take some time today to understand how to organize things a little bit better, both in the way we create our applications and also in the way that our applications run, the actual layout of our applications. So first of all, we're going to create what we call a more of a runner class and an organization class with this pane organizer. So our runner class is essentially just going to have some basic things. So our main class, plus we have our stage, and now we're giving our stage a title, but instead of creating a pane here, which is where we would have done it before and then set our scene with our pane and then show our scene, we're actually going to use this pane organizer class, and we're going to have a method in that class that gets our root pane and returns our root pane. And all of the pieces that go into that root pane and all of that organization is now going to go into our pane organizer. The thing that's nice about this is it gives us an app here that we can run and get everything generic, and so we can really use this layout for every program that we do, and then all of the details of how it gets created can come over into this pane organizer, and then depending on how we're organizing it, we can look at details. So we're going to do that. We're going to start over here, and we're going to take a look today at a border pane, and we're going to look at how this border pane works and how we can use it with other things. So let's create our root pane here, private border pane. We'll call it root. Okay, and we did have a method to return that, so public, and we're going to return a pane generically, get root, and this is going to return our root pane. Okay, so if we come back over to our demo here, we now have no more errors. This is done. We don't need to touch it anymore. Everything else we're going to do is in here. Now in our constructor, what we're going to do is we're going to essentially kick off anything that we want to kind of create it and have different methods to create things. So our organizer really has all of the different pieces. So our root is going to be a new border pane. Okay, and if I run this now, I have a very generic open layout with really nothing that's going on. So I want to give it some formatting, and again, I could put some of that formatting right here in the constructor, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kick off some different methods that do it. So the first method I'm going to kick off is a method to set the background colors, and we're going to set background colors primarily so that you can see what the border pane looks like. The border pane is essentially 5 different panes, a center, a top, a bottom, a left, and a right. And I can use one of them or I can use all 5 of them to help me organize things. So I'm going to create this method here. So for each of the panes that we're going to put in there, we're going to essentially add a pane and put it as a different color. So my top pane is going to be a very generic pane. I'm going to set the style as an orange pane, and I'm going to make the size 300 wide by 50 tall. And then what I do to put this into my root pane is root.setCenter, and I'm going to tell it, set top, and I'm going to tell it to use the top pane. Now remember, the root is already my border pane. I'm adding my border pane to my scene automatically with my other file, and here I'm just basically taking and saying take this top pane and set it as my top pane there. Now when I run this here, you're going to see I have just a top pane. I have no other panes. I haven't specified anything else, so the only pane that it uses is that top pane. If I expand this box, you see it just keeps with that top pane. Nothing else has been defined. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. Okay, so doing the same thing for the bottom, again making it 300 by 50 and adding that into my bottom section. When I run this now, you'll see the 2 sections, and again, as I expand them, those sections hold at their 300 by 50, and it's really just kind of pulling the center part out as I do that. I'm going to add left and right, and I'll come back and we can talk about what that does with our center. Alright, so left and right, very similar. I just made these 50 wide by 300 tall instead of the same width. And now when I run this here, we've specified our top, our bottom, our left, and our right. We haven't specified our center, but that center still takes shape because of the fact that I've defined these other blocks and I need the space for those other blocks. Now if I try to pull this out, you'll notice my center grows as those blocks basically stay the same. Now I do want to create a panel in the center, but I am going to use this for a little bit more. So I'm going to actually define this center as a V-box, and I'm going to put it up here. And then kind of define that down here. Okay, and then the center pane, we will set the style, but we're not going to set the preferred width because we're going to let that width kind of float with everything else. And let's call this tomato. And then I just need to add that to my root, set center, and we'll call it center pane. Okay, and now when I run this, you'll see my center pane has that color, and it grows and shrinks. Now if you'll notice, if I do come and set the size for my center, it will change the size of my other aspects as well. So if I take and blow this out to 400 and make this 400, then I'm essentially blowing out the sizes, and it no longer, these no longer hold that 300 by 50 and 300 by 50 here. They are now having to stretch to accommodate that center section, which is bigger. And when I shrink it, the center has priority as far as shrinking. All right, so we got this. We're done with this method here. What I want to do also is then create and look at how we can organize different elements inside of that block. So let's take a look back at our V-box that we used before and how we can organize buttons and how we can space things out accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new method called create center. And I have to run this after the set background because my center is actually created here, and here I'm just going to put the form to it. So I'm going to do that, add a new method. Now in here, what I'm going to do is put 3 buttons, and I want to organize those 3 buttons so that they take up the whole width and also take up the whole height and are spaced out evenly on the height. But let's go ahead and create them first, and then we'll look at how we organize them. Okay, so I've created my 3 buttons, just generic buttons. Put them in my center pane. Again, my center pane is already in my V-box, which is already in my root, so I don't have to do anything else. I run them, and you notice I have 3 buttons sitting at the top, not really doing much for me. I want to organize them a little bit differently. I do want to take off that sizing as well for right now. I'm just going to comment that out. So what I can do is I can basically say, okay, I want to stretch these buttons out because right now 1, 2, and 3 are not taking up the same amount of space. 3 is a little bit wider, and so you'll notice 3 takes up a little bit more space. Okay, so I'm going to then take now and I'm going to add a max width to it, and so I'm going to say 1.set max width. And I could give it a specific value, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually give it a large value, double max value. So that takes the largest value that it has and puts it in there. Now I'm not going to necessarily expand out to that volume or value. I'm just going to go out as big as I can and still sit in that V-box. And so it's not going to blow out my V-box, just going to go and expand out that far. And so let me do this. Okay. Now when I run this here, you'll notice that my boxes now span that whole width there. They would take up more space if I would let them, so if I pull this out, they take up more space. I'm not setting a preferred width, I'm just setting a maximum width so that it can go out as big as it can get. Now one thing you'll notice though is it doesn't have any space around it. So I want to add some space around my boxes, and I can really do this in a couple different ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add padding around the top, bottom, left, and right, and that'll create space inside of my V-box, which basically says don't put anything too close to the edges of my V-box. It's not on the individual buttons, but it's on the V-box as a whole. So kind of think of it as padding around the outside of the box. So I do that with my center pane. I'm going to do set padding. And I have to use an inset value, so I'm going to do new insets. And I can do it two ways. One way is to give it one number. So if I give it a number 10, what it does is it creates a value of 10 all around. So I have 10 on the top, left, right, bottom. Now the bottom, I don't necessarily notice it because I'm bigger, but when I shrink up, you'll notice that it goes to that level there. Now the other thing I can do though is I can actually give it values for the top and the bottom, or top, left, right, and bottom together, or differently. It starts at the top, then goes to the right, then bottom, and then left. So again, 4 different values. It goes top, left, or top, right, left, top, right, bottom, left. Okay, so now again, if I run this, you'll notice that my insets are actually bigger on the top and bottom versus the left and right. So I'm going to do that for my padding, but I don't have any space around my buttons. So I can do spacing around the buttons one of two ways. One is set spacing, and this is probably the easiest way to do it. And I'm going to use 10, and these values are pixels, so I'm basically saying give me 10 pixels around every item. And now when I take this here, you'll see it creates spacing. But what it does is it actually creates spacing between the items. It doesn't do anything on the top and the bottom, and that's okay. That's probably what I'm looking for. If I wanted to, the other way I can do this is using margins. And the margins go on the individual nodes. So if I say set margins, you notice it's asking me for a child. So I'm going to say 1, and I need new insets. Okay, and the margins can go on all the different places. So let's say I'll do 10 on the top, I'll do 10 on the left, I'm going to do 5 on bottom, and 5 on the right. I'm going to do these same margins for my others, except when I look at 2, I don't want to have 10 on top because I already have the 5 from the previous one. And same thing with 3, I only want to have 5 on top, and I'll have 10 on the bottom. And now when I run this, I want to get rid of my spacing. You'll notice that I now have different spaces there. And what happened with my first one? Oh, I forgot to change this one to 3. So now let me run that there. Again, I have spacing there. Now the padding is added to this, so you notice I have more padding now. I might want to use that in conjunction with my padding. So now that I have more padding there, I can reduce these. Let me just move all of these to 10. So I reduce my padding there. So I've gotten I've spaced these out nice and evenly, but what I want to do now is space them out top to bottom. And I'm going to do this I could do this a couple ways, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add some filler between buttons 1 and 2 and another set of filler between 2 and 3. And I'm going to tell that filler to basically expand as needed and be kind of my part that grows and shrinks when my box grows and shrinks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a region. I'm going to call it spacer 1 and spacer 2. Okay, and I can add these regions in here. So I'm going to call this spacer 1. Again, I'm putting it between 1 and 2, and spacer 2 between 2 and 3. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my VBox to prioritize these when I need to grow. So this is going to be set V growth. And I'm going to tell it spacer 1 has priority dot always, and spacer 2 has priority always. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take and put that space in there and grow it as much as it can. And it's going to have priority over anything else that it grows. But as I shrink down, you notice my buttons shrink down nice and neatly for me. And they keep that space. And when I get to a point where I can't shrink those anymore, then it starts to take off on the others and I start to lose pieces there. But again, I can grow and shrink accordingly, and my boxes all stay in that centered spot and are nice and organized however I go. And when I get too small, they just kind of deal with it. So that's what I wanted to show you for this video. I know this was a little bit longer, but hopefully you got some good ideas as far as how to organize your panels, and we'll go from there. And let me just give you a quick scroll through of my code, so if you need it, if there's anything you're missing, this is everything in this panel. And then back in the demo, we had just this part here.